you.
Oh, okay. After all that excitement, here we go again. I mean, we've done this how many times again, Sheila, during the whole COVID lockdown? A million times, and yet the technical glitches continue for some of us. Anyway, welcome again. Welcome from Johannesburg. Again, I want to just go over what I've just said in terms of, first of all, thanking the Network of African Women Environmentalists, Nawe, for organizing this webinar on urban resilience. Can everybody see me now? Perfect. My name is Tandi Moape and I work with the Netherlands Red Cross Society. I also represent Partners for Resilience Network. We as PFR are one of the Nawe partners that is supporting this webinar. PFR is very excited to be joining this discussion because obviously issues of vulnerability in urban areas have become prime in our today's context. PFR is an alliance that works on climate change and ecosystem management and is dedicated to working on building community resilience. Urban vulnerability and exposure to risk is increasing in the face of climate change. Recently, I repeat, we have all witnessed the devastating impacts of Cyclone Eloise in Mozambique. This is barely 2 years, under 2 years, actually, after Cyclone Idai battered the same communities. And these communities have obviously not even recovered from the previous disaster. Our forests are disappearing. This is destroying our water catchment areas. This further impacts food security and increases the risk to flooding and landslides. People from rural areas are migrating to bigger cities, and unfortunately, they end up in poor and planned settlements. And again, some from the big cities are venturing onto even more dangerous journeys across oceans even to seek a better life. To all these complexities, COVID has added another layer of vulnerability, especially for the urban poor. For most of these poor people, unfortunately, it's all about survival. It's about today, facing today and surviving today. And climate change is actually the last thing on their minds, even though the evidence is showing us that really the poorest among us are the ones that are most affected by the climate crisis. And so this event is an important one for us as PFR, for Nawe partners, because we think that having a conversation with the experts here on the panel and those of you that are in the audience is important to galvanize ideas and action to reduce vulnerability and risk exposure in urban areas. We have an exciting list of panelists. I will get to introducing them as we start the conversation, but I want to also turn to the online audience once again and say welcome and thank you for joining us. Please, as the conversations begin, we want you to be active throughout the discussions. Send us your comments, challenge the thinking that is presented by our experts, but also give us suggestions on how you think we can improve urban resilience going forward. And so, to get us started, Sheila, we wanted to share this very compelling story and journey that Freetown is on in Sierra Leone. It's a very transformative agenda to turn Freetown into a tree town and is led by Mayor Yvonne Akisoya. I think we have a very short documentary that we want to quickly show our online participants and our panelists, and hopefully that will provoke a discussion going forward. Great. Thank you, Sheila, and the technical team for flawlessly showing us that video that reemphasizes the issue of ecosystem restoration and protection in our urban cities. We were really hoping that the Madam Mayor Aki Soya would join us, but unfortunately, as public office demands, she has been called to attend to some urgent issues and unfortunately can't be with us. We're still excited though that we're able to share that journey that Freetown is on, and hopefully it offers some inspiration in terms of how one person has moved the agenda forward in starting to transform their city. She speaks about the loss of our forests, which I highlighted in the beginning of this conversation. She speaks about also planting trees, not just being about offering us shade, but really about it being our survival. She speaks about the importance of partnerships across society, something we're going to hear about hopefully going forward in this conversation, and also the emphasis on community leadership in these initiatives to ensure ownership. And of course, the call on all of us to ensure that we're doing our part in our small ways by planting a tree or whatever else restoration initiatives you might be leading in your environment, in your work, in your home, in your communities. Let me move now to our panel of speakers, and I want to introduce Nicholas Yu. I would be happy if Nicholas can be on video so our panelists can also meet you. Now, Nicholas is a veteran urban specialist. He has served as the policy advisor and planning advisor to the UN Habitat, and also as a manager of the UN Habitat conference that was held in Istanbul in 1996. This is now 2021. The World Urban Forum met last year. Nicholas, we would be very happy to hear your reflections on how you see policy changes and implementation that has happened over the many years that you've been working in the urban space. You're also a co-founder and honorary chairman of the UN Habitat World Urban Campaign Steering Committee, a think tank. And amongst all these things that you've done is also working with institutions like the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, private companies like Siemens, Engie, and the Global Cities Business Alliance. A very rich CV and experience, Nicholas. I want to invite you to share some insights with us about how you view the context of urban vulnerability today, and also offer us some insights to set the big picture as we start this conversation on urban resilience. Nicholas.
Thank you so much. And thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to all of you. I think I'm the only male panelist. So, that's a
yes, it's our honor.
Anyway, I think, yes, you pointed to a critical word, vulnerability. I think that 2020 showed us just how vulnerable we all are, right? And previously, I was asked also to reflect on what are some of the lessons that we can learn from the current pandemic that has brought practically the whole world to its knees from the perspective of urban resilience. Well, first, I want to say right off the bat that the virus emerged in a very complex environment, not a neutral space. And this is critical. It is really critical. Every aspect of our cities, the planning, the design, the management, have impacts on our daily health and well-being. And what COVID has done has shown all the weak spots in our system, right? The most fundamental pinch point, I believe, has to be the issue of inequalities, not just social, economic, but it is also spatial and physical. I'm constantly reminded that we should be washing our hands frequently. How do you tell somebody who's living in a Nairobi slum that can most probably only afford 10 liters of water a day for all their needs to wash their hands frequently? It's just not possible. So where we live, how we live, where we work, where do our children go to school, how do they go to school, how do we go from point A to point B, has all being revealed as having weak spots in the system. All of these issues predate the pandemic, right? And the obviously are but what the pandemic has done has really revealed where they lie. The crisis that has ensued from the pandemic, the economic and social crisis and psychological crisis, the secondary impact of the virus, so to speak, exposed how fragile our systems are. I'm talking about commercial systems, industrial systems, recreational systems, even our food chains and supply chains are affected. I recently read an article that said that car production has to stop in many countries because all the microchips that the cars need to work well are being used for domestic appliances, cell phones, everything to allow people to interact virtually, especially schools, etc. Just how fragile are those systems? Imagine that the wealthiest country on earth, the US, did not have the means to produce or procure face masks or PE equipment and still cannot track and trace COVID cases. The third point I want to make is I think we were very woefully unprepared in terms of governance, and I stress governance. During this period, throughout last year, I traveled, I was in Kenya, I was in Italy, I was in Spain, I was in the UK and China and the US. And with the exception of one of those countries, and I'll let you guess which one, I was shocked by the inconsistencies of the information and the communication that was being provided to people. First of all, in certain cases, between central and local government, there's a clear divide. I was in the States when certain states decided to open up early, despite guidelines that the government had issued that shouldn't happen before the R factor is below 1. So the inability of governments to communicate effectively, to coordinate across agencies and jurisdictions, and in some cases to contradict science, has really shown that um, if we are to build back better, we have to get the governance equation right. I'm reminded of what happened in Kobe 3 or 4 decades ago. They had a massive earthquake. Japan was supposed to be the best prepared country in the world for earthquakes, and yet Kobe was a total disaster. And the reason was that they had centralized everything. And when the earthquake hit the nerve center, all communications was blocked. I think today we're witnessing the opposite end of the spectrum. Everything is so decentralized, right, that there is no more effective coordination where it counts. So what are some of the takeaways? I think they point to the fundamental issues that we have to resolve if we are to attain the SDGs, if we are to attain the new urban agenda and the global agendas. First of all, it became very evident during this crisis that we are still operating largely in silos. We are very, very far from a systems approach. And this is just one domain, public health. I think another takeaway is that what we have done for the last, especially 2 decades with the advent of technology, is that we have pursued efficiency versus resilience. We have sought with all the things that technology can afford us to do to cut down on costs, do more with less, become more efficient. But I want to remind everybody that one of the definitions of resilience, one of the key characteristics of resilience, especially urban resilience, is redundancy, right? So if your metro doesn't work, what other means of transport do you have? If the buses are not safe, what other means of transport do you have, right? If the cell phones don't work, what other means of telecommunications do you have, right? We have pursued efficiency to the point where all we need is one weak link in a chain for a system to collapse. Last but not least, this might be a little bit of esoteric concept, but I think it's very important. We have the wrong incentives in place. What we have been doing by listening to a little bit too much to economists is that we have discounted future risks in the face of immediate needs. Right? So we're not planning long term. Everything we do is short term today. So I believe that if we are to build back better, and obviously everybody shares the opinion that we need to build back better, we have to address some of these fundamental issues, these cracks that COVID-19 has shown in our system, right? And that these cracks need to be repaired before we can make true progress on the other global agendas, be it gender equality, be it economic resilience, be it physical and human settlement resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Very provoking takeaways that you present to us, but also really, really interesting to hear how you describe the compounding vulnerabilities that society faces today. I would like to have, if there's questions from the audience. I see Yande Banda in Zambia saying, super insightful. Thank you, Nicholas, that was powerful. But I do know that there will be questions, I think, on what you've presented as key takeaways in terms of moving us forward as practitioners, as policy makers, those that are influencing policies, to ensure that what we're all witnessing as cracks in our society can actually transform us. We see those as opportunities to help us build better. I do want to come back to you because I do know you have to leave us at some point, but let me quickly turn to the other panelists so that we can hear a few words and maybe come back to you before you can step away to just reflect on some of the takeaways that I think offer us some challenges in interrogating how society is functioning at the moment. May I please introduce Dr. Sylvia Kroos, who is an urban specialist. She is currently working with the Africa Center for Cities at the University of Cape Town and School of Architecture and Planning at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. Dr. Sylvia Kroos, we would like to hear from you on the work that you're doing at the Africa Center for Cities and the emphasis that you're placing on interdisciplinary approaches that are needed to examine how society moves to sustainability. Now, Nicholas just told us that society and COVID has been exposed for still operating in silos. Now, the concept of interdisciplinary approaches has been around for some time. So Sylvia, if you may come onto the screen, please, and help us understand how you think we're functioning as a society. Interdisciplinary approaches are so emphasized, and yet we're failing. But let's hear from you about your work and how you see the whole approach on systems thinking going forward. Dr. Sylvia, please.
Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it's a shame that we didn't have Mayor Yvonne joining us. I've heard her speak on a number of other occasions, and she's just such an inspiring person and leader. And just going back to the TED talk that you showed us from her, she said something. She gave the example of the planting the trees, and she said we need to involve everyone. And she gave some examples of how the city worked together with local communities and using technology also to track the trees that were planted. And I thought that was so interesting and such a good example of how cities are actually taking matters into their own hands and using data-driven approaches and working together with communities to come up with solutions. And I actually remember when I was doing, as part of a research project recently, doing work in Luanda in Angola. And there was also an initiative where trees were planted. and that had not been done together with the community. So most of the trees that had been planted after a number of months, they actually died because actually in the first place, the trees that were planted were not the correct trees or the proper type for that particular area for the soil. And then there was also no plan in place and no ownership among the local community to actually maintain those plants and to water them and whatnot. Um, so I think it shows I think her example is very powerful. It might seem things like it's obvious that you would have to have a plan in place, but often we know that in many cities and places across the world, these initiatives, and often a lot of money is spent in implementing initiatives that then have no sustainability. So actually what I want to propose is not just the importance of interdisciplinarity or interdisciplinary approaches to issues around urban resilience and sustainability, but also use the term that has become used more recently, which is transdisciplinary research, which is actually a kind of research that doesn't combine just different academic disciplines. So bringing together, for instance, an anthropologist together with a biologist or an engineer, but also working together with other actors in society. So that can be communities, like the example that the mayor gave, but also the private sector, for instance, or academia or researchers. Um, and that is something that we've been doing a lot of experimentation with at the Center for Cities at the University of Cape Town. So a number of examples that I can give. So we've had for a number of years a program that was called a City Lab. And City Lab was with reference to a laboratory as a place where we're actually experimenting in the kind of science sense, but also lab in the sense that people were laboring. We were working together to try out different things. And a few examples of the City Lab program, there were a number of City Labs organized around different themes. So there was one around climate change, and the idea was there to bring together practitioners, city officials and community members to discuss issues around climate change. But there have been other city labs as well that were geographically based, where it was focused on one particular community in the city. And that work has been really interesting in terms of breaking some of the silos also that Nicholas mentioned that are often still in place. Another interesting example and program which has run, I think, for about 10 years, and I was part of the second phase, which was a partnership or program between the City of Cape Town and the African Center for Cities at UCT, which was called the Knowledge Transfer Program, KTP. And under that Knowledge Transfer Program, we had a very close collaboration with the City of Cape Town, where we either had city officials spending time at the university, or in my case, I spent 2 years as an embedded researcher working embedded within the City of Cape Town. And as a researcher, that was a really interesting experience, because I feel as researchers, we want to be very critical, and we're very good at pointing out what the problems are. But then when you come to the solutions, you actually need to also be aware of the constraints that city officials face. And these can be financial, these can be technical, these can be also the silos that exist within the city where different departments are not talking to each other. So for me, from a personal but also researcher perspective, it was so insightful to be able to spend the time with the city, so that I could have a better idea of what it was actually like and what the opportunities are for solutions and how these should be approached. So I think some of the lessons that we can learn from that work is really the importance of these kind of collaborations that span not just different disciplines, but also different actors in society. But also, it's still a real challenge. And I did that particular work as part of a broader comparative project on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And there are a number of development agendas, such as the SDGs, but also the Paris Climate Agenda, the Sendai Agreement, that are now actually recognizing the importance of cities. as not just drivers, but also sites and actors in achieving sustainable development. But for cities to actually play that role, implement initiatives to fulfill those goals, but also monitor their work, report on it, the kind of data that you need for that. You really need to work in partnerships. And so I hope that work and these examples give kind of an insight into what some of the challenges are, but also what's possible.
Thank you, Dr. Sylvia Cross. Thank you so much for those very insightful thoughts that you've given us. Again, some provoking thoughts. I see from our online audience, everybody seems very happy with the powerful insights that you're all providing. I'm seated here, so maybe I will try and play a little bit of a devil's advocate and ask and challenge you, my panelists, to maybe tell us how much progress are we really making? I mean, Nicholas, you started work on urban vulnerability in 1996, your big first meeting, and then years later, as it's 26 years, 21 years later, what changes are you seeing? You did give a rather grim picture. You offer us some great takeaways, but it does sound like we're in inertia in terms of making some progress in the way that inclusion, in the way that, what did Sylvia call it? Transdisciplinary research is applied in involving all sectors of societies. Nicholas, do you feel we're making progress in the way we're moving this agenda forward to reduce vulnerability in urban areas?
Well, yes and no. Being the director of the Guangzhou Institute for Urban Innovation, one of my jobs is to collect success stories from around the world on how cities are using innovative approaches to solve some of these problems. Now, when we look at the city or city region level, we do see fantastic examples of how cities are trying to reduce their vulnerabilities in trying to even tackle the global agendas. What I'm less positive is, in most cases, it's the cities that are way ahead of central government. In most cases, right? It's cities that have taken it upon themselves, set up a sustainability agenda, and goes way beyond the national policy in almost all the cases I know. In very few instances is it the central government that is in the driver's seat. And yet central government is critical in allocating resources, in determining priorities. So, on the one hand, we see, certainly because of popular pressure, that mayors, governors are really doing exciting new things on trying to solve some very old problems, our solid waste, our drainage, our sewage, our drinking water, air pollution, congestion, etc. And I have dozens of examples to share with all of you. But the critical issue is, how do we guarantee that those things can be scaled up? And that requires really collaboration between all tiers of government, right? Because we have a policy continuity problem at the central government level, we have a policy continuity problem at the local government level, democracy. And the only way we can overcome that major shortcoming is to have a good collaboration between tiers of government, that we can set long-term goals. Because it's definitely, we need aspirational goals to go forward. So I repeat, yes, when I look at what's happening at the local level, I'm enthused. That's why I continue doing what I'm doing, because every 2 years I get another few hundred examples of what cities are doing on the ground to solve these problems. But at the same time, I see a lack of true dialogue between central and local government.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the very honest reflections on how, I think, how society is making progress, but also offering those insights that offer us even more challenging thoughts in terms of how do we ensure from policy level, from the academia, and from society itself, that there can be stronger collaboration to move these agendas forward. Dr. Sylvia, I will come back to you because you've also highlighted some really interesting examples on the city labs that you've mentioned as an example of how to break these silos. And so we will try and elevate that to the continental level, for example, in Africa, but also learn from examples that Nicholas has given from Latin America and also Asia on how really the disconnect still exists between central government and the cities. I also like the fact that you mentioned, after looking at the Freetown mayor's presentation, on how cities are taking matters into their own hands, something that again Nicholas alludes to. So definitely something they're lacking in terms of, I think, mobilizing solidarity for central governments to take ownership, to be held accountable in how the implementation of all these amazing policy frameworks, the Paris Climate Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, the new urban agenda, Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. How do all these things ultimately link with each other in terms of reducing risk, but more particularly how central governments are taking responsibility? 2030 is our deadline where we're trying to achieve all these goals. Are we going to make it? We're making great strides in some areas. And yet, again, some of the takeaways show us that we are really lagging behind in how to mobilize the whole of society, address the inequalities that are existing to actually have effective implementation of these policies. May I turn to Professor Bettino Ngueno, who is an associate professor at the University of California, Davis. UC Davis, I understand we should call it, and not the other acronyms I was trying to come up with. Professor Bettina, welcome. We're very delighted to have you join us in this conversation.
Delighted to be
You,
here.
you are writing a book that I think will capture a lot of hearts. Growing Old in a New City. I think a lot of our older generations are going through this dilemma of the young ones overriding the cities. And yet, here we are trying to also ensure that cities are made for everyone, from the young, the youth themselves, who should really be critical voices in these conversations we're having. And I'm hoping one of us is representing that youth voice. And I hope even from the speakers, or rather the audience participants, if there's questions from the young people, they can challenge us to ask the right questions on what the youth voice must mean in these conversations. So tell us a little bit more about your work and what has driven your passion to write this book, because on growing old in the new city, because you seem far away from getting to growing old in the new city. What has inspired you?
Well, I am one of those people who are growing old in a new city, and partly it's the rapid change of Nairobi. I came back to Nairobi in 2011 from working abroad, and I found that every single day driving across the city, on the way back you had to go a different way because something had been demolished or changed or built within the time of 12 hours of work or something like that. And it was just hard to find my way around the city, and partly that shows the extreme rapid change that many African cities are going through. And they're building upwards, they're building outwards, they're densifying urban, or just the population in general is increasing in urban centers. And so you're getting these big demographic, social, environmental changes in cities. And I was wondering, what is it like to have lived in that city for, let's say, 82 years, like my parents, and see that change, so that the city that you knew as a child is 10 times the size, is completely different demographically. It reaches, it has all these buildings that replace old things, and old things are taken down when new things come in. And so my interest was, how does that work out? How does one think about it, and what does it feel like to be in such a city?
Having listened to Nicholas and Sylvia, describing the disconnect on central governments developing policies and the municipalities taking charge. How do you see these inequalities being addressed going forward? Other than
So
your experience that you give us, which is really fascinating, actually, from observing cities completely change right under your nose, if I may call it so, to something actually that is seemingly um, unsupportive to the growing population. How do you see these inequalities being addressed going forward?
So I was really interested that inequality is so central, and as an anthropologist, we look at it sort of in the space of daily life, and how does inequality? How do you see it in different ways? And I was thinking that inequality actually can be summed up as a growing gap between the wealthy and the poor, and the both locally, nationally, regionally, and internationally, and its effect on the environment. And those things affect cities massively. So even beyond the city and the central government, we're also dealing internationally. So a city like Nairobi, a lot of the real estate is actually controlled internationally. So it's bought by people in Asia, Europe, America, and other parts of Africa. So a real estate market is not just a national one. It's not even just a city one. And then what is then built for those international markets might be different than what serves a person who lives for all their life in that city. So that's part of the dynamism of a city like Nairobi. And I'm interested in the environmental effect. And one of those environmental effects, there are actually two that are particularly interesting to me. And one is a growing wealth of cities and people in Africa. So it's people generally are growing wealthier. They have more, and therefore they dispose of things more. And it's actually the accumulation of two things, plastics and concrete. And both of those things have incredible environmental effects, especially on water. And whether it's clogging rivers or building, changing drainage patterns, and the disappearance of green spaces. So I think concrete and plastics also change the relationship. It's not just governments and central governments, but also the social relationship between wealthy and poor, and how we use resources and how that affects the other people's ability to have a safe environment.
I mean, fantastic. I think fantastic ideas that, again, challenge all of us in how we're living our daily lives. I like how you actually really simplify it when we talk about inequality and bring it down to the very basic of how to look at the inequalities and how society is transforming from really our daily lives. You know, the use of plastics, clogging drainage, causing flooding. It's all these multifaceted issues that are causing even more complexities and widening, again, the inequalities. Because if you're rich and living in some wealthy suburb, you really are not going to be affected by those issues of the clogging of the drainage, the flooding of a township like Kibera that's right on the river. You're not seeing all that mess that is being caused by our consumerism. So exciting, really great insights that you provide. We don't have any questions, so you're obviously all very convincing speakers. I'm hoping somebody will challenge somebody and say, no, I actually do not agree with that because there's something else that's happening in my society that completely maybe goes against what's been presented, but you are presenting very strong cases, so very exciting to see how this conversation going. And how I think I also like the fact that it very much, I think, demystifies all these complex concepts and really becomes about daily life. And that's what I think that video that we saw at the beginning is so compelling to look at, because it's really driving through a city. You suddenly see the transformation happening right under your nose, and you're deciding to make a change. The use of plastics can be given as an example as well. I do want you to reflect. Maybe I'll go back to Sylvia right now. There's a question. I cannot see the questions, so technical team, if you can please help me repost them to the private chat that I'm looking at, and then I'll read it back to the speakers. And I do know that Nicholas, unfortunately, also has to step away. So I'm glad that we did get to hear from him. Oh, he's still here. Excellent. So I think he's taking in a bow. Thank you, Nicholas, for providing us with some great insights. We do hope to continue reflecting on the takeaways that you provided with us as part of the bigger picture. Dr. Sylvia, I wanted you to reflect on the gender aspects as relates to the work that you're doing. What are your observations so far as adaptation, resilience in urban cities, the concept of inclusion, and transdisciplinary research that you spoke about? I want you to approach that from a gender perspective and give us your insights on how you see that world evolving or even happening now in terms of contributing to urban resilience.
That's that's quite a difficult question, but I think it can be approached from different angles. On a very practical level, so as part of work I was doing in Angola, Mozambique, we were working together with community members to collect data on indicators, selected indicators of the urban SDG. So that's work that we did over the past 2 years in three selected neighborhoods in the cities of Luanda and Maputo. And we really had a lot of challenges in trying to bring in women into that work because for a number of practical reasons. And one of the reasons was that in both cities, you have very active neighborhood or residents associations and communities that are kind of at a kind of ward level are the structures that kind of manage local issues and that report back to the municipal administration, for instance. And we found that actually most of the leaders of those structures were men, and they kind of functioned in a way as gatekeepers. So they didn't really allow us to include the women, and we really had to actively seek them out. It was a little bit better in Mozambique. And then when we ended up working together with the Association of Mozambican Municipalities in compiling some of that data and seeing how it could feed into national reporting on the SDGs. So Mozambique presented its first voluntary national review on the SDGs to the UN last year, and they included some of the work that we did in their report. But while they, in their reporting, presented numbers on the number of women in national government positions in the National Assembly. And they were saying, we're making a lot of progress. See, we now have this percentage of women in these positions. We were seeing a different reality at the local level and even at the city council level. Data from the Mozambican Association of Local Municipalities, they show that in a lot of municipalities, city council members, local administrators continue to be men, and that often when women are in these leadership positions, they tend to hold the portfolio of, social development, or they don't really hold like those key, So I think there's still a lot of work to be done in that respect, in terms of, both at the community level and at the leadership and government level, really making sure that women are participating and that their voices are being heard, because we know from practice and we know from research the important role of women when it comes to day-to-day, livelihoods, survival, and especially now with the pandemic, that has become even clearer that the big burden has fallen on the shoulders of women. So that's definitely still, yeah, a lot of work to be done.
Excellent. I will have Sheila later on join us to just reflect on why an organization like the Network of African Women Environmentalists exists. It's because of the issues that you precisely describe. And so we're also excited that we had Nicholas with us today. So we as women are not talking to ourselves, that we can bring in these diverse voices and also experiences, because it's the only way actually that change is going to happen. Very happy to also see that in our online audience, I see Siabulela, Sokomani, definitely male. I've seen Raymond, I've seen Samuel. So it's great that we're actually getting the attention as the network of African women environmentalists to draw in this expertise and experiences from our men who are allies in pushing the agenda on climate adaptation. There's a question from Lorraine and from Yande Banda. I'll get to Yande soon, but let's listen to what Lorraine says. Lorraine says, using the COVID pandemic as an example, countries with financial wealth are managing better, with the majority of the global south not privileged in this way. How do we sustain the approaches to plan for the long term? Issues of climate finance are still very much top down to navigate this very complex environment. Dr. Sylvia or Dr. Bettina, would you want to address that question? Or if anyone from the audience again wants to intervene, we would be happy to hear from our audience speakers. Do you want to address that issue of financial wealth between the North and South and how it complicates further the issues of inequality, but also the top-down structures in climate finance?
I can say, I would actually like to give an example that's a bit of the opposite that happened during COVID times in Nairobi. So I'm part of the group Friends of City Park, and they're an environmentalist group because City Park is a natural forest in Nairobi as well as a park, and as well as basically a group that supports the government in its activities in the park. So much of the work that we do is sort of at a supportive government level, although it's very much grassroots. So it's an odd way, in fact, to do a city park, for instance, a broken sewer that lets in sewage into the river that passes through City Park. We not only help get technical teams, find them, do surveys, find where the broken sewer is, and then work with the government to fix it. So it's, to me, one of the most interesting and strong space, even to find financing, because we've been looking for financing to help the government preserve that park, is that in-between space of supporting governmental efforts, as well as community efforts in the use and preservation of green spaces within cities. So it's odd that even during COVID that was possible. And actually we worked quite a lot. I think governments in some places said, oh, we can do something different in this time. Some recognize that, some didn't. And it might not always be what people wanted, but partly our work is to say, hey, but people have been working on this anyway. These are our long-term plans. Can you adjust your immediate interest to do something now that looks good during COVID to fit within a long-term plan?
Excellent. I hope, Lorraine, that does address your question. Thank you for that example, Bettina. I want to turn to Muka Kamari, who has offered to give some insights. Perhaps wants to ask or add to the conversation that, that Bettina has just expounded on. Technical team, are we able to get Muka Kamari online and unmute him or her?
I will unmute him just now. Allowed to talk there. I've allowed to talk and I've asked him or her to unmute. So Muka Kamari, I think you can speak.
I see Muka Kamari online, but
yeah,
still on mute. Let me move on to Yande's question then, while we wait for our audience speaker to get on with maybe opening the mic. So Lorraine has been addressed, and I know she has another question, but let's hear what Yande says. Yande in Zambia asks, curious to know, or rather to ask on transdisciplinary research. Academia researchers and communities were highlighted, but curious to know how young people are meaningfully engaged. How can young climate voices be highlighted and amplified in urban resilience. Now, this young lady, Yande, I've seen on Twitter, and I'm a passionate follower of her work. I think she's only 18. She has managed to do some amazing things in terms of transforming and pushing for policy change in Zambia. So I suppose her question is also asking, because these are not easy spaces for young people to engage in. So Sylvia, on the aspect of transdisciplinary research, how do you ensure that voices like Yande are meaningfully engaged?
Yeah, I think that's so important because we know, our cities, we have the majority of people living in cities are actually young people. And it sounds so cliche, but the young people are the future. And I do feel that in universities, but also, going from the primary to the secondary education, there are so many opportunities to bring people, to bring young people in and to use education to address issues around the environment, around sustainability. And very concretely, when the research I mentioned earlier, the work that we were doing in Luanda and Maputo, we actually also work with students in the data collection. And it was a process in which they were involved from the beginning to the data collection itself, and then analyzing the data. We would go back to the communities and do focus groups and workshops to validate the data. And for them, it was often the first experience that they had to actually do work in practice, to actually go into communities, to talk to people, to use tools to collect data. So it was not just for them an opportunity to actually bring things into practice, because often, and I think in a lot of schools and universities across the continent, when you are in school, it's all about the books and it's all about reading the theory, and there's very little attention for actually, bringing things into practice. There are very few, possibilities for internships or for trainings. There's very little attention to issues around research methods. And I mean, of course, I'm the researcher. I don't want to go too much around, it's not to say that everyone has to become a researcher, but it is through these kind of engagements that young people can be brought in, can gain experience, and can actually also see how they can make a difference, identify particular issues or topics. It can be in their own neighborhoods, and it can give them the tools to see what is happening, to generate knowledge and data that they can use, for instance, in other engagements with their local leaders, or governance structures. So I think that would really be a way. I would really want to make a case for education as a very important tool to bring the youth in and to highlight their voice.
Excellent. I do hope that answers your question, Yande. And if you have any appetite to reach out to any of the speakers, just keep sending those messages. You guys know how to reach out to myself, to Sheila via Twitter, but also via LinkedIn. But also, if you need any contacts from any of the speakers, do send us an email or rather message on the chat box, and we will make sure to connect you so that you can explore some of these conversations further and ensure that that concept or idea of inclusion is really being taken forward. Sheila, I'm conscious on time. I wonder if you want to come in now and speak to us about the landscape adoption that Nawe is leading. And then if we still have time, as per your guidance, we can still go back and look at some of the comments that we're receiving. I've seen Lorraine's question is still pending to be addressed, but maybe we can get Sheila right now to just come in and reflect a little bit on the landscape approach and link us back to the conversations that we've been having on urban vulnerability, resilience, but also adaptation. Sheila.
Thank you so much, Sandy. I'm sorry, I'm not showing my camera because we're here with a whole technical crew and it's a little untidy. But yes, we want to encourage people to go on the Nawe website. It's nawe.group, which is very simple. On that, we have 3 things we'd like you to do, please. Number 1, we would like you to think about becoming a member, male or female. Because once we have membership, we have participation, we have ideas, and we can then begin to mobilize resources to really address the restoration agenda, which is our Nawe agenda for the next decade. Secondly, we would like you to look at our campaign, which is an Adopt a Landscape campaign. And I'll share this later if there's a little bit time, we'll share screen. But we are asking people, wherever you are, look at the landscape that you care passionately about, and you think about paying attention to it for the next decade, and thinking about what your vision would be for restoration for that landscape for the next decade. And that would be really wonderful. The more people we get, the more we get a tapestry of visions, the more we weave it into a holistic One Earth view. So that's the second thing. Become a member. The third thing is, if you have an expert, as we know most people that tune into these are, we have an expert roster that we're just starting. And so what we will begin to do is to connect our experts to people on the ground, and in getting from idea, from vision to realization, especially our young people. We'll connect them with experts and have intergenerational dialogue. So we will do that. I'll just leave it there. Maybe at the end, I'll just show 2 or 3 pages of the website, but perhaps we can go back to 1 or 2 questions and we can close off whenever you're comfortable, Thandi. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Sheila, for that. So the landscape approach, or rather the landscape adoption initiative, is this really exciting project that Nawe has launched. And I think all of us that are in Nawe have gone on to adopt the landscape that we're passionate about. I've gone back to my home country in Zambia, and I'm looking at a river system where I grew up that is completely polluted. It's a system that provides livelihoods, but is now invaded by hyacinth. And so how do we continue to raise awareness on how to protect that very important landscape for my community and ensure that it's contributing the water, clean water, but also the fishing livelihoods that it provides to the local farmers. And so we would be very interested that you join us in this journey, that you continue to raise voices around those landscapes that you are passionate about. Thank you, Sheila, for that. We will come back to you so you can just show us a few pages before we close off. Let's get back to Lorraine and address her question, or whether it's a comment. We'll get to know what that is. Let me just read what it says. Urban resilience initiatives are proving challenging when it comes to real inclusion and participation on the ground. For example, land use changes in some urban areas, in some urban plans, are pushing women away from their livelihoods, urban agriculture, to pave way to private real estate. I think Bettina made reference to this discussion in her conversation with us. I wonder if you want to make further comments on this, Bettina, as regards the challenges of inclusion, again, which seems to, I think, touch a lot of hearts in our participants, and especially the idea of including women in urban resilience. It seems to be emerging as a big problem.
I think inclusion and access are some of the biggest problems that we have for cities. And it's inclusion and access to the environment, to resources, to services, and to land, basically. And definitely women and the youth are tremendously affected by that. And I think part of the fact that many cities in Africa also are global markets for real estate, this question is a political one. It's not really a science-based one or otherwise. It's a real question of how would we like our cities to be, and what kind of political effort are we going to make to produce them as such? And that's why I really liked the mayor of Freetown, because she ran for government exactly on those kind of politics, saying she wanted to make Freetown a tree town, and that's why she became mayor. And so I think this is a political question that we really, really need to answer. How should our property regimes be structured? What is the role of urban agriculture? What is the space of women? How are we imagining women in cities? How are we imagining a just city in multiple ways, whether it's water, whether it's greenery, and whether it's economy and aging?
Excellent. Thank you so much. I mean, you bring up the question of urban agriculture, and I've seen Sia is online, and he is doing this amazing thing in Cape Town where he's running a very small nursery, not even small, it looks massive. But this nursery is about protecting the environment, but also linked to livelihoods. And I think the conversations around land restoration, protecting our environment really has to be linked to people's survival, because ultimately, I think if people are really struggling to make a living, the concept and ideas of protecting the environment become really far-fetched. I do wish that Sia could come online, but I'm not in charge of controlling the technicalities of getting people online. But if Sia, you were online, we would have been happy to hear from you about how you, as a man, are leading the restoration agenda, but also using your initiative to include wider sectors of society in what you're doing. I see Sia is online. If he can be unmuted, would be great. Or if perfect, he's unmuted. Sia, we would like to hear from you about the idea of inclusion in your business approach.
Hello, guys. This is like putting me on the spot, but you know
Yes, we
what?
are.
Yeah. I mean, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I've learned so much just listening. And at times, we as men, we just have to listen, and it's an approach that we need to learn as men across the whole world, actually. So, my kind of like thing when it comes to inclusion and just letting the community being part of the necessary setup where we're training young women how to collect seed within the 7 kilometer radius of where we're actually going to be doing the restoration, greening, and rehabilitation work that we do in the nursery. So being having them earning a bit of income that is well above the minimum wages of the agricultural sector in Cape Town, and just letting them be part of the necessary and feel that there is an entrepreneurial whole economy that is there within restoration. So that's how I'm doing it in the necessary in Cape Town.
Excellent. Thank you. So Lorraine, hope you're happy that there are examples out there on how urban agriculture is still being protected and how urban agriculture is being linked to the restoration agenda, but also providing support to livelihoods. Vendelin agrees that the concept and the idea on focusing on livelihoods is a very important one. Thank you guys for all the comments that you're sending in. And I think to sort of wrap up, take us to quickly or rather slowly wrap up, I do want to get some final reflections from Dr. Sylvia and Professor Bettina on how you see the future of the whole urbanization concept, the mega trend for African cities. How can this be a driver for positive sustainability for our continent and the world, really? So I want you to reflect on that so we can live on a high, feeling hopeful, feeling positive that with all the challenges that the urban setup is facing, they are opportunities. So if you can reflect for me very briefly, Bettina, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Sylvia, and then wrap up with Sheila on just how you see the current mega trend of urbanization be used as a positive phenomena going forward.
Thank you so much. Of course, cities are also amazing places of possibility, diversity, change, youth, and often education. You have an immensely talented number of people in cities, and they're concentrated in one place, and they can be mobilized in that space to think about the future. So I think the future really of cities is super positive. That's very dynamic in Africa. They are changing. Our choice right now is about what kind of political engagement are we going to do to guide that change politically, not just leave it for technical issues or other things, but really say, what kind of cities do we want? And therefore, let's go get the tech to produce it.
Thank you. Thanks, Bettina. Sylvia.
You left us with such a big question. It's hard to. I agree with Bettina. I mean, there's cities are so vibrant. I do want to. So I think with Nicholas, it came up what he mentioned around, multi-level. So a lot of exciting things may be happening at the city level, but these may not necessarily be supported by central governments. So I do think that there's still a lot of scope for trying to improve mechanisms across multiple levels of government to support that work. And also horizontally. So within South Africa, but also within Africa, there's so many interesting things that are happening at the city level. But these are not always shared among cities. They may be shared with cities in the US. So often there are a lot of these global connections, but I think there's a lot of scope for learning across different levels of government, but also across cities themselves. And I think there are some interesting things happening already in these kind of cross-city exchanges and learnings and partnerships, because we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of interesting things happening, and I think if we would be able to share those, that would give even more. That would take us even further. So I would end there with that note.
Excellent. I think it's nice to see all these positive thoughts on how we can take the challenges and transform them into opportunities going forward as we all strive to improve urban resilience. Wendelin is happy to hear your thoughts and would like to contact you, Sylvia. I'll get the email address and connect the two of you. Sheila, do you want to give us a few reflections or show us a few slides that you had, and then I'll come back and very quickly wrap up so we don't take too much of our beloved audience's time. It's been very informative conversation and very happy that our audience has been very engaged as well.
Thank you so much. So first of all, I just want to make everybody aware that today is World Wetlands Day. And so if you follow us on social media, you will have seen a number of posters that we have around Africa's wetlands. So here is a picture of one of the wetlands, and it happens to be in Zambia, in South Luangwa, in the national park. And so we just have a simple message, and it's restore Africa's wetlands. Here's another one, a picture of Lake Victoria at sunset. Lake Victoria, a water body that is shared by three countries, three countries, and it's very, very important to so many livelihoods and just the ecosystem of the entire region. So, and here the mangroves in Cameroon. Mangroves are critically important coastal wetlands areas. So what we're doing at Nawe on specific days is alerting people to be aware of the ecosystems in Africa and the restoration needs, but more importantly, the communities that are already engaged. There's nowhere where people are not engaged at some level. They just need support, they just need some connections, and they just need you, in fact, to be interested and to help us to join the dots. As some of the panelists have said, all the panelists have talked about connections at all different levels. That's where the impact comes, that's where scale comes. So this is what we're running today. So please follow us on social media. So if we go to our campaign, Adopt a Landscape, if you look, this is our website, nawe.group. And on nawe.group, you mostly see upcoming webinars. You'll see about our campaign, and then you'll see about Nawe to introduce you to read more. But if we go to if we go to About Nawe, you see some of the things we've done before. We have a lot of content. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have our videos which tell you about all the different landscapes. Of course, this series of webinars is part of the Earth Science Cafe to join the dots between science and society. And it was launched during COVID because we had actually planned physical events and then it couldn't happen. So the next one that's going to come up is the final one in the series, webinar 6, will be the launch of the Decade on Ecosystems Restoration. So we will have an event which we will tell you the date. It may be May, maybe in June, but we'll tell you what the next date will be, because this is a global event and we want to work with partners to make sure that everybody begins to think about restoration, you know, the idea of restoration in all its senses. We have many postcards, so this is just showing you our homepage. But if you go on to our Adopt a Landscape, you'll see we're asking people to think about where you are, what you care passionately about, and what you'd like to see change. Go on the site, put your name, your email, and it'll be great if you could share a picture of your landscape as it is and something about what you'd like to see change in the next decade. And so what you will eventually see is a geolocation map, which will show how many people have joined, and then you'll be able to get partnerships, and we will also be able to create synergies and maximize the resources to get people to, first of all, look at shared visions, and then what are the paths to realizing that. So that's about that campaign. The next thing I think I told you about is how we really want you to join and be a member. Please join Nawe today if you can. It's really just like 4 short questions, so that we can keep connecting with you, so that we can become much more vibrant and much more relevant to you, your community, and to the environmental community. Then our expert roster is also, so these are just the 1, 2, 3 short questions that we ask you. So it won't take you even 2 minutes. So please, if you could do it today, it would be great. And then finally, we have, you can receive our newsletter if you subscribe as well. It's at the bottom of every page. And these are our partners. Partners for the Dutch Red Cross, Partners for Resilience, Sandy's wonderful organization that has been so supportive right from the beginning. CTCN, the Climate Technology, the Climate Technology Center and Network, has been amazing and basically sponsored this whole series of webinars during this time of COVID. Really grateful to CTCN. UN Women are great partners, FAO, UNDP, and the Wangari Maathai Foundation. So in each of those organizations, there is a woman leading the focus of Nawe within those organizations, so that we can connect. As you find with international organizations, there's a lot of working in silos. We're trying to eliminate waste in the way that we work as organizations. In fact, even just waste of great ideas and talent. So I think that's it from me. Please look on our website, join us, and tell us what you'd like us to do next and how we can improve in serving your needs. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Sheila, for taking us through the fantastic website and the very exciting Adopt a Landscape initiative, which I think is at the heart of everyone that has been sharing their passion and the example. So we do hope we will soon see Bettina, we'll soon see Sylvia, we'll soon see everybody that's been active in this conversation. Think about the immediate environment and adopt that landscape so we can have as many ambassadors for protecting the environment. I think the example that we showed of the mayor of Freetown is one that actually provokes that, that thinking of acting from within your power and probably taking that a little bit further to start challenging systems that we function in. I don't want to take too much time in going through the summary of the notes, but I just thought it would be important to highlight some of the critical takeaways that have been reflected on by Nicholas, but were also reinforced by Sylvia and Bettina in their conversations. So decentralization being a challenge, having unraveled the disjointed approaches within governments. So there we have a job as advocates to continue ensuring that we are making the linkages between central governments where we influence policy, but also at the city level. We are obviously still operating in silos. COVID has unraveled that. There's no questions about it. So again, within our different spaces, how do we challenge ourselves to make sure we're connecting better? Operating in silos maybe in the sectorial approach, but that also actually touches on the issue of inclusion that has come up quite strongly from our panelists, but also from our audience speakers, ensuring that we're connecting with youth voices, that we're talking to women, and that we're talking to the elderly, that again came up through Bettina's presentation, and that we include all these voices through different phases of implementation. Technology is an interesting one because it has obviously made us function, it has made us efficient, and yet the same technology seems to have unraveled some cracks in terms of how we're prioritizing efficiency over our immediate needs and the long-term planning. We're glad actually that we have the UNCTCN as one of the Nawe members, because Rose is leading a fantastic initiative of using technology to connect people right at the grassroots to global, regional, and national levels. So that is something that we all have to use to challenge ourselves in terms of how we think we are being efficient, and yet perhaps maybe even being exclusive in the way we're talking with each other. Wrong incentives being prioritized, that's been highlighted in terms of, I think, the drive for wealth versus looking around the environment and also seeing how we're impacting those people around us that might be less fortunate than we are. And then, of course, the need to address those cracks through the different initiatives. The aspect of transboundary, transdisciplinary research has come up, and talks of the connectivity across society. So many other issues raised in terms of, I think what I also really enjoyed was the approach of looking at all these challenges really from our daily lives, which Bettina so eloquently elaborated on in terms of just being aware of our immediate environment and how it's changing, and using that as a launch pad for taking action and really pushing for transformation within our societies. Great to hear from all the audience speakers. Sia, Nicholas, we were very delighted that as men we could hear your voices. Proves that we as Nawe are doing our best to make sure that we're talking to people across society, not just talking to women, as part of our agenda is really trying to empower women voices and leadership in the environmental and land restoration, ecosystem restoration agenda. I want to thank you all for joining us, for being patient and sticking with us for a good 1 hour, 30 minutes. Sheila, thank you for organizing this again. Partners for Resilience has been delighted to support this event. It's been very, very informative, and I hope that we keep talking. So if you're on Twitter, you will find us there. All of us are quite active as Nawe members. If you're on LinkedIn, also look out for our names, and we'll be very happy to connect with you. Raymond in the Netherlands, thank you for joining. He says it was a very interesting seminar. He's an expert on urban issues, so I'm quite surprised he didn't say anything, but I'm sure he agrees and will be challenging me privately, I'm sure, when we have our catch-up coffee tomorrow to discuss all things resilience in the coming year. So thank you so much, everyone. I wish you a nice evening, and hope to see you on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and we want to see your landscape adopted on the Nawe website. Sylvia, Bettina, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Sheila.